The first thing they teach you in search and rescue is that the woods don't lie, but people do. I'm Patricia Rodriguez, and I've been volunteering with Olympic Peninsula Search and Rescue for 8 years now. Started after my nephew got lost on Mount Storm King for 16 hours. Came back talking about trails that weren't on any map. Kids say things like that. Adults don't, or they didn't, until Daniel Kraus went missing on the Solduke Valley Trail System in late September of 2023. I'd worked maybe 200 searches by then. Missing hikers, lost hunters, the occasional suicide. You learn to read the patterns. Where people go when they're hurt, scared, or looking to disappear forever. The Solduke Valley trails are some of the most well-marked in the park-maintained paths, with regular GPS waypoints, wooden bridges over the creek crossings, even mile markers every half mile. It's the kind of place families take their kids for easy day hikes. Retirees from Seattle come up on weekends with their golden retrievers and walking sticks. Not the kind of place an experienced hiker like Daniel Kraus just vanishes, but that's exactly what happened on September 28th. Kraus had signed the trail register at 7:30 in the morning, planning a solo hike on the Lover's Lane Trail, a moderate 3-mile loop that connects back to the main Solduke Trail. His wife expected him back by 3 in the afternoon. When he didn't show by 6, she called it in. Standard missing hiker protocol. Our team got the call at 7:15. I remember because I was just finishing dinner when my pager went off. That familiar beep that meant someone was lost in the woods and darkness was coming fast. Standard protocol. Check the parking area. Interview the wife. Start working the trail with headlamps. I was paired with Jake Morrison, a park ranger who'd worked these trails for 15 years. If anyone knew the Solduke system, it was Jake. He'd walked every mile of trail in that valley, knew every creek crossing and every shortcut the day hikers tried to take. We found Kraus's car right where his wife said it would be. Keys locked inside, windows cracked for air circulation, everything normal. His wife Linda walked us through his gear. Day pack, water bottles, energy bars, GPS unit, emergency whistle. She was methodical about it, the way people get when they're trying to stay calm. Experienced hiker, she kept saying. 23 years of hiking together. Never got lost, always stuck to marked trails, always checked in by radio every 2 hours when he went solo. Jake and I started up the Lover's Lane Trail just after 8 p.m. The beam of my headlamp caught the familiar wooden trail markers every few hundred yards, each one bearing the distinctive yellow and blue Olympic National Park blazes. The path was clear, well-worn, impossible to miss even in full darkness. I'd walked this exact trail dozens of times before on other searches, training exercises, even recreational hikes with my own family. But something felt wrong from the start. Not anything I could put my finger on. Just that subtle wrongness you develop a sense for after enough years in the field. The forest was too quiet, maybe. Usually, you'd hear owls calling, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the distant sound of Solduke Creek running over the rocks. Tonight there was nothing but our footsteps and the sound of our breathing. Or maybe it was the trail markers that seemed closer together than they should have been, appearing in my headlamp beam more frequently than I remembered. We'd been hiking for about 40 minutes, making good time on the well-maintained path, when Jake stopped dead in front of me. Just froze mid-step like he'd hit an invisible wall. "Pat," he said, and his voice had gone strange, tight. "Look at your GPS." I checked the unit clipped to my pack strap. According to the readout, we were at coordinates 47.974, north 123.816 west. I'd logged those exact coordinates before they matched the spot where we'd found the abandoned camping gear from a missing person case 3 months earlier. A college student from Western Washington University who'd never turned up, just left his gear in a neat pile and vanished. But that case had been on the Solduke Falls Trail, 2 miles east of where we were supposed to be. "Equipment malfunction," I said. But even as the words came out, I didn't believe them. Jake was already checking his own GPS unit, then his phone, then the park radio. All government-issued equipment, regularly calibrated, battery levels good. All three devices showed the same coordinates. "We're on the Lover's Lane Trail," Jake said, but he didn't sound convinced. "We never left the Lover's Lane Trail. I've been watching the markers." I looked around with my headlamp. The wooden trail markers were there, exactly where they should be. Yellow and blue blazes, Park Service seal, even the familiar scuff marks from years of hikers brushing past them. The path was clear and well maintained, pine needles swept to the sides by countless boots. But according to every piece of electronic equipment we carried, we were standing in a completely different part of the forest. That's when I saw the first spiral. My light caught something that didn't belong, about 20 feet off the trail. A neat arrangement of camping gear spread out in a perfect circle. A blue day pack, opened and emptied with military precision. A water bottle standing upright in the center, like some kind of monument. Energy bar wrappers arranged in a spiral pattern around the perimeter, each one folded precisely in half, each fold line sharp enough to cut paper. "Jake," I called, my voice barely above a whisper. He came over and we both stared at the arrangement. It was too deliberate, too neat. In 8 years of search and rescue, I'd seen how people abandon their gear when they're hurt or panicked or lost. They drop things. They scatter things. They don't stop to fold their trash into geometric patterns that would make a math teacher proud. Jake got on the radio to base camp. "We've got possible evidence at these coordinates," he said, reading off the GPS numbers that didn't match where we thought we were, requesting additional units and crime scene photography. The response crackled back through static. "Copy that. Be advised, we've got 2 other teams reporting the same coordinates from different trail systems. Stand by." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. 2 other teams, same coordinates, different trails. Over the next hour, 3 more search teams arrived at our location. I watched them emerge from the tree line like ghosts, their headlamps bobbing through the darkness. One team had been working the Sol Duke Falls Trail, 2 miles to the east. Another had been checking the Ancient Groves Trail, 1.5 miles to the north. The third had been searching the Deer Lake Trail, which should have been on the opposite side of the valley entirely. But we were all standing in the same clearing, looking at the same spiral of camping gear, reading the same impossible coordinates on our GPS units. 5 different trails, all leading to the same place that shouldn't exist. That's when we found the second spiral, then the third, then the fourth. They were everywhere once you started looking for them. Neat circles of abandoned hiking equipment, each one arranged with the same obsessive precision. Day packs opened and emptied, contents sorted by size and type, water bottles standing upright in the centers like sentinels, energy bars, trail mix packages, even pieces of clothing folded and arranged in perfect spirals radiating outward from the center, socks paired and rolled, shirts folded department store neat. And every single arrangement was fresh. No weather damage, no animal disturbance, no dust or debris. As if they'd been placed there minutes before we arrived, by someone who cared deeply about making them perfect. Jake was on the radio constantly now, trying to coordinate with the other teams, trying to make sense of our GPS readings. But every time he called in our position, dispatch said they were tracking us on 5 different trails simultaneously. Every time we tried to walk back the way we'd come, following our own footprints in the soft earth, our GPS coordinates stayed exactly the same. It was Miller, one of the other volunteers, who made the connection that changed everything. "Pat?" he said, his voice tight with something that might have been fear. "These gear arrangements. Count the items in each spiral." I counted. 15 items in the first spiral we'd found. 15 in the second. 15 in all of them. Always 15, arranged in the same pattern, the same mathematical precision. "Daniel Krause's wife," Miller continued. She said he was carrying 15 items in his day pack. Listed them for us. 15 exactly. We spent the rest of the night trying to hike out of that clearing. Every trail we took, every direction we walked, led us back to the same coordinates, the same spirals, the same impossible place that existed at the intersection of 5 different trails that should never have met. Dawn finally broke around 6:30 in the morning, and only then did our GPS units start showing different readings. Only then could we follow the trails back to the parking area, back to the real world, where coordinates meant what they were supposed to mean. We never found Daniel Kraus. But 3 days later, when the next search team went out to look for a missing day hiker named Sarah Chen, they found 16 spirals in that same clearing. And when they counted the items in the newest arrangement, a green day pack with the tag still on it, trail food that hadn't even been opened, there were 16 items total. Sarah Chen had been carrying 16 items when she disappeared. I still volunteer with Olympic Peninsula Search and Rescue, but I don't work the Sol Duc Valley anymore. Can't bring myself to walk those trails, knowing what's waiting there in that clearing that exists everywhere and nowhere at once. Sometimes, late at night, I get calls from other volunteers who've worked that area. They always ask the same question: how many spirals did you count? The number keeps growing. Last I heard, they were up to 23. Silence, when it's complete, sounds like the inside of a grave. I'm James Watts. Everyone calls me Jimmy, and I've been coordinating search and rescue operations for Mono County for 12 years now. Based out of Bridgeport, we cover some of the most remote terrain in California: the Eastern Sierra, abandoned mining districts, stretches of desert where people go missing and sometimes never come back. I've worked everything from lost hikers on Mount Whitney to plane crashes in the Ansel Adams Wilderness, but I'd never encountered anything like what happened near Bodie in October of 2023. Dr. Sarah Kellerman went missing on October 15th. She was a geologist from UC Davis, up in the Bodie Hills, doing research on historical mining impacts for her dissertation. Smart woman, experienced in remote fieldwork, always followed proper safety protocols. She'd been staying at the Bridgeport Inn for a week, checking in with the front desk every evening at 6 p.m. sharp. When she missed her check-in on the 15th, the desk clerk waited until 8 p.m. before calling the sheriff's department. Our initial response was standard: contact her emergency contacts, check her research permits, locate her vehicle. We found her white Honda Pilot parked at the Bodie State Historic Park Visitor Center, locked and undisturbed. The park rangers said she'd signed in at 9 a.m. with plans to survey the old Standard Mill site about 2 miles northeast of the main ghost town. Solo research trip, expected back by 4 p.m. The Standard Mill area sits in a depression between 2 hills, surrounded by the skeletal remains of 19th century mining operations. Rusted machinery, collapsed wooden structures, mine shafts sealed with concrete and steel grating. It's the kind of place that feels abandoned, even when you're not alone, desolate in a way that gets under your skin. Dr. Kellerman had specifically requested access to the area because most researchers avoided it. Too unstable, too isolated, too many ways to get hurt. I assembled a 4-person team for the initial search: myself, Deputy Martinez from the Sheriff's Department, and 2 volunteer SAR members, Helen Cross and Rick Thompson. We met at the Visitor Center at 7 a.m. on October 16th, loaded up with standard search equipment: radios, GPS units, emergency medical supplies, and portable recording devices to document any evidence we found. The morning was clear and cold, typical Eastern Sierra weather for mid-October. We hiked the marked trail toward the Standard Mill site, following Dr. Kellerman's planned route according to her research proposal. For the first mile and a half, everything was normal: desert scrub, scattered mine tailings, the distant peaks of the Sierra Nevada catching the early sunlight. Our radios crackled with routine check-ins from dispatch. GPS coordinates tracked normally. Then we reached the perimeter. I noticed it first as we crested a small ridge overlooking the Standard Mill Depression. The silence hit like walking into a wall. Not just quiet, complete absence of sound. No wind rustling through the sagebrush. No distant traffic from Highway 395. No aircraft overhead, though we'd been hearing jets from the naval base all morning. Radio check. I called into my handheld unit. Nothing. Not even static. Deputy Martinez tried his radio, then his cell phone. Helen and Rick checked their equipment. All of our communication devices showed full signal strength, but none of them would transmit or receive. When we tried to record voice memos on our digital recorders, the displays showed that they were recording, but when we played them back, there was nothing. Just empty silence where our voices should have been. Equipment failure, Martinez said, but his voice sounded strange in the absolute quiet, muffled, like the air itself was absorbing the sound. We pressed on toward the mill site, following Dr. Kellerman's GPS coordinates from her research proposal. The silence deepened with every step. It wasn't just the absence of ambient noise, it was the presence of something else. A pressure in the air, a weight that made my ears feel like they needed to pop. That's when Rick found the first camera. Hidden behind a pile of rusted ore cars, positioned to overlook the trail we'd just walked. A professional-grade surveillance camera in a weatherproof housing, powered by a solar panel, with a clear view of anyone approaching the mill site. No markings, no serial numbers, no indication of who had placed it there. We found 6 more cameras over the next hour, all professionally installed, all positioned to monitor the approaches to the Standard Mill area. Some were motion-activated, others appeared to be recording continuously. All of them were focused inward, toward the center of the depression where the mill ruins stood. But here's what made my skin crawl. When we tried to examine the cameras more closely, our own recording equipment would malfunction in the exact same way. Digital cameras would show that they were taking pictures, but the images would be completely black. Video recorders would run, but capture nothing but darkness. Even our basic voice recorders, analog devices that should have worked regardless of electronic interference, produced nothing but silence. Someone was watching the watchers, and they had the technology to make sure no evidence of their surveillance could be documented. We found Dr. Kellerman's research equipment about a quarter mile from the mill ruins. Her GPS unit, field notebook, and geological survey tools all neatly arranged on a flat rock like an offering. Her notebook was open to the last entry she'd made. 10 divided by 15. 2:47 p.m. Anomalous electromagnetic readings near mill foundation. Recommend full geophysical survey. Something significant buried here. That was when I realized we were being herded. The camera placement wasn't random. They formed a perimeter, a surveillance net designed to monitor anyone approaching the mill site. And our equipment failures weren't malfunctions, they were intentional interference. Someone wanted us to find Dr. Kellerman's equipment. Someone wanted us to read her last notes. Someone was guiding us toward the mill ruins. I should have called for backup then. Should have turned the team around and hiked back to the vehicles. But Dr. Kellerman was still missing, and the mill ruins were the last place she'd been seen. We descended into the depression as the afternoon shadows grew longer. The mill foundation was a concrete slab, about 50 feet square, surrounded by the collapsed remains of wooden structures and rusted machinery. And there, in the exact center of the foundation, was a section of concrete that had been recently disturbed. Fresh tool marks, clean edges, a neat rectangular opening about 3 feet by 2 feet. Deputy Martinez knelt by the opening and shone his flashlight down into the darkness. "It's deep," he said. "Can't see the bottom, but there's something down there." I looked over his shoulder. About 20 feet down, caught in the beam of his flashlight, was Dr. Kellerman's distinctive red backpack. And beside it, barely visible in the shadows, something that might have been clothing. "Dr. Kellerman!" I called down into the opening. No response. But my voice, the first sound that had carried properly since we'd entered the silent zone, echoed back up from the depths. And in that echo, distorted by distance and stone, I heard something that made my blood freeze. My own voice, calling back up to me, not an echo, a recording, a perfect reproduction of my words, played back from speakers hidden somewhere in the darkness below. That's when Helen Cross grabbed my arm. "Jimmy," she whispered, "look around." I looked up from the opening and saw them. Figures standing at the edge of the silent zone, just visible through the afternoon haze. At least a dozen people, maybe more, positioned at regular intervals around the perimeter of the depression. Too far away to make out faces or details, but close enough to see that they weren't moving. They were just standing there, watching us. We'd been led into a trap. I don't remember making the decision to run. One moment, we were staring down into that opening, listening to our own voices played back from the depths. And the next, we were scrambling up the slope toward the ridge. But the watchers had moved. They were closer now, close enough that I could see they were wearing identical dark clothing, close enough that I could see their faces were covered by some kind of masks or hoods. Our equipment started working again the moment we crossed back into the sound zone. Radios crackled to life, GPS units reconnected to satellites, recording devices began capturing audio normally. We didn't stop running until we reached the vehicles. I called in every available unit, sheriff's deputies, state police, even reached out to federal agencies. But when we returned to the Standard Mill site the next morning with a full tactical team, there was nothing. No surveillance cameras, no opening in the concrete foundation, no sign that the area had been disturbed. We never found Dr. Sarah Kellerman. But I still get reports, maybe once every few months, of hikers and researchers going missing near Bodie. And every time I check the files, I see the same pattern. They were all investigating something in that area, all following up on anomalous readings or unusual geological formations. I don't work that sector anymore, but sometimes late at night, I'll tune my radio to the emergency frequencies and just listen. And sometimes, carried on the static between stations, I hear voices calling for help from places that don't exist on any map. They always sound like recordings. Some places exist only when they want to be found. I'm Linda Vasquez, and I've been tracking missing persons through the Boundary Waters canoe area for 17 years. Based out of Ely, Minnesota, I work with the Cook County Sheriff's Office, covering some of the most remote wilderness in the continental United States. 1 million acres of pristine lakes and forests, where people go to disappear from civilization, and sometimes just disappear altogether. I've found lost canoeists, stranded fishermen, injured hikers who wandered off marked portages. But I'd never encountered anything like the Trevor Holbrook case that started in August of 2023. Trevor was an experienced wilderness camper from Minneapolis, 28 years old, worked as a software engineer, but spent every vacation in the backcountry. He'd been coming to the Boundary Waters for 6 years, always solo, always meticulous about his permits and safety protocols. His planned route was standard: put in at Moose Lake, paddle north through Agnes and Nina Lakes, set up base camp on Nina for 3 days of fishing and photography. He was supposed to exit on August 20th. When he didn't show at the Moose Lake landing, the outfitter who'd rented him his canoe waited until evening before calling it in. Standard missing paddler protocol: check the route, contact the family, get search teams on the water at first light. I coordinated the initial search with Deputy Tom Crawford and 4 volunteer searchers. We followed Trevor's registered route, checking every campsite and portage between Moose and Nina Lakes. The Boundary Waters has designated camping areas, cleared spots with fire rings and latrine facilities, all mapped and numbered. During peak season like August, you need reservations for specific sites. Trevor had reserved campsite 14 on Nina Lake for August 18th through 20th. We found his canoe on the afternoon of August 21st, tied off at a small island about a quarter mile from campsite 14. Everything was in order, paddles secured, gear bag still lashed to the thwarts, life jacket hanging from the bow. But Trevor's personal equipment, his tent, sleeping bag, food pack, was gone. Deputy Crawford found the trail almost immediately, boot prints leading from the shore into the dense forest of the island's interior. Size 11 hiking boots, same brand Trevor's family said he always wore. The tracks were clear in the soft earth near the water, but they faded as the ground became rockier and more heavily forested. What bothered me was the direction. The tracks led away from campsite 14, away from any of the established camping areas, straight into the thickest part of the island, where there was no reason for an experienced camper to go. The vegetation was dense, young birch and spruce, so thick you'd have to push through it branch by branch. No clearings, no flat ground suitable for camping, certainly nowhere you'd want to set up a tent. We followed the trail for about 200 yards before it disappeared entirely on a granite outcrop. Standard tracking procedure: establish a search radius, work in expanding circles, look for any sign of passage through the underbrush. But after 4 hours of systematic searching, we found nothing. No bent branches, no disturbed ground, no indication that anyone had passed through that area. It was like Trevor had walked into the forest and simply vanished. That night, back at the sheriff's office, I started cross-referencing our case with other missing person reports from the Boundary Waters. That's when I found the pattern. 8 missing persons over the past 3 years, all experienced wilderness campers, all last seen heading into areas where they had no logical reason to go. But what connected them wasn't just their disappearances, it was their final communications. Text messages, satellite phone calls, social media posts, all describing the same thing. They'd found an incredible campsite, better than anything they'd ever seen. Trevor's last Instagram post, sent via satellite communicator at 4:30 p.m. on August 19th, found the most amazing campsite, crystal clear spring, perfect fire ring, even has a wooden table and bench. GPS shows middle of nowhere, but this place is like a wilderness resort, worth every penny of permit fees. The GPS coordinates in his post metadata pointed to the exact spot where we'd lost his trail. Dense forest, no clearings, no springs, certainly no amenities. I called in a larger search team the next morning. 12 searchers, including a K9 unit and a drone operator. We expanded our search radius to cover the entire island, then the surrounding shoreline. The dogs picked up Trevor's scent at several points, but the trails always led to the same area, that granite outcrop where his boot prints had vanished. That's when we found the others. The drone operator was reviewing footage from his aerial survey when he spotted them. 3 separate sets of footprints leading from different parts of the shoreline, all converging on the same area where Trevor's tracks had disappeared. Fresh prints, made within the past few days based on how clearly they showed in the soft earth. But here's what made my skin crawl. When we went to investigate those tracks on foot, we couldn't find them. The drone footage clearly showed the impressions from above, but standing on the ground where they should have been, there was nothing. Undisturbed forest floor, no sign that anyone had passed through. Deputy Crawford thought the drone's camera was malfunctioning. I thought we were dealing with something far worse. That afternoon, I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of continuing the ground search, I posted a watch on the island, concealed observation point on the mainland, high-powered spotting scope, round-the-clock surveillance. If people were disappearing into that area, I wanted to see how. We didn't have to wait long. At 7:15 p.m., just as the August sun was setting through the pines, I saw movement through the scope. A figure emerging from the dense forest on the island, walking toward the shoreline. Male, medium build, wearing hiking clothes and carrying a large backpack. He moved with purpose, like he knew exactly where he was going. It was Trevor Holbrook. I called Deputy Crawford immediately. Subject located, alive and mobile, approaching the shoreline from the interior of the island. But when Crawford arrived with backup 15 minutes later, there was no one there. We searched the shoreline, the forest, the entire island. Nothing. No footprints, no disturbance, no sign that anyone had been there. Except for one thing. Tied to a tree near where I'd seen Trevor emerge was a piece of orange flagging tape that hadn't been there during our earlier searches, the kind wilderness campers use to mark their routes. I untied the tape and examined it under my flashlight. Written on it in black marker, in what looked like Trevor's handwriting based on samples from his permit application, was a message. Camp Echo 7, best site in the wilderness. Highly recommend. 5 stars. Camp Echo 7. I'd been working the Boundary Waters for 17 years, knew every designated campsite by number and name. There was no Camp Echo 7. That night, I researched every missing person case from the past 5 years. All of them, every single one, had mentioned finding an amazing campsite in their final communications. Different names: Paradise Cove, Hidden Valley Camp, Wilderness Lodge, Eagle's Rest, but always the same description: crystal clear spring water, professional grade amenities, perfect location away from other campers, and always the same GPS coordinates, pointing to areas of dense wilderness where no campsite could possibly exist. I requested a full forensic team the next morning. Ground-penetrating radar, soil analysis, the works. If there was something buried on that island, some kind of underground facility or hidden structure, I was going to find it. The results came back negative. Solid granite bedrock, 6 inches below the surface. No cavities, no artificial structures. But the lead technician mentioned something that still keeps me awake at night. Strangest thing, he said, our equipment kept malfunctioning in that one area. GPS units showing locations that didn't match the survey markers. Digital cameras taking pictures of things that weren't there when you looked with the naked eye. Like the entire area was under some kind of electromagnetic interference. I've seen the photographs. They show clearings where there are only trees, structures where there's only forest, people camping in areas where no one could possibly set up a tent. The Trevor Holbrook case remains open, but I don't work that sector of the Boundary Waters anymore. Too many searchers have reported equipment malfunctions, false readings, sightings of campsites that can't be found on foot. But sometimes, on clear nights when I'm monitoring the emergency frequencies, I pick up radio transmissions from coordinates that don't exist. Campers calling in to report their locations, describing perfect sites with amenities that sound too good to be true. They always give their locations as Camp Echo 7, and their voices always sound like they're having the time of their lives. The dead don't usually know proper radio protocol. I'm Robert Hutchins. Everyone calls me Bobby, and I've been handling communications for Hart County Search and Rescue for 9 years now. Based out of Horse Cave, Kentucky, we cover the most cave-dense region in North America. Mammoth Cave National Park, dozens of commercial cave tours, and hundreds of unmapped limestone caverns that honeycomb the ground beneath our feet. When people go missing underground, I'm the voice that coordinates the rescue teams, the lifeline between the surface world and the darkness below. I've talked lost cavers through panic attacks in tight spaces, coordinated rope rescues from vertical drops that would make your stomach turn, guided search teams through underground mazes that stretch for miles. In 9 years, I've seen everything caves can throw at you: flash floods, rock falls, hypothermia, equipment failures. But I've never seen anything like what happened with Angela Foster in November of 2023. Angela disappeared on November 3rd. She was a graduate student in geology from Western Kentucky University, 26 years old, experienced caver with her own equipment and cave rescue certification, part of a research team studying groundwater flow patterns in the Wild Cave system, about 8 miles southeast of Mammoth Cave proper. The Wild Cave system isn't open to tourists. It's a restricted research area with narrow passages, vertical drops, and underground rivers that can flash flood without warning. The kind of place where only the most experienced cavers are allowed, and even then, only with proper permits and safety protocols. Angela had gone in solo that morning to check water level monitoring equipment placed deeper in the system. Standard procedure for her research team: solo trips for routine equipment checks, buddy system for exploration or risky work. She was carrying a full communication kit, helmet radio, backup handheld unit, emergency beacon. Experienced cavers like Angela don't just vanish without a trace. She was supposed to surface by 4 p.m. and radio in her status. When she missed her check-in, her research supervisor waited until 6 p.m. before calling us. Our initial response team included myself as communications coordinator, Deputy Lisa Hayes from the Sheriff's Department, and 3 certified cave rescue specialists, Tom Brennan, Maria Santos, and Jeff Wilson. All experienced underground rescue technicians who'd worked dozens of cave emergencies over the years. I set up the mobile command post at the Wild Cave entrance while the team prepared for underground search operations. Standard cave rescue protocol: establish surface communications, maintain constant radio contact with underground teams, coordinate with backup units on standby. The Wild Cave entrance is a narrow limestone opening barely wide enough for a person, hidden in a grove of cedar trees that blocks most of the afternoon sunlight. It looks unremarkable from the surface, just a crack in the earth that you could walk past without noticing, but underneath, it opens into a complex system of chambers and passages that extends for miles. The research team had installed a permanent communication relay system, radio repeaters, placed throughout the upper levels of the cave to maintain contact with surface operations. In theory, we could talk to searchers anywhere in the mapped portions of the system. Deputy Hayes led the first search team underground at 7:30 p.m., following Angela's planned route to the monitoring station about half a mile into the cave. I tracked their progress on the surface, logging their position reports every 15 minutes as they moved through the system. Standard procedure: constant communication, regular check-ins, immediate response to any sign of trouble. The cave radio system was working perfectly. Hayes's team reported normal conditions as they descended through the entrance passages, navigated the squeeze known as Devil's Keyhole, and continued toward the underground monitoring station. Air quality was good. Water levels were normal. No signs of recent rockfall or structural instability. Everything was normal until they reached the monitoring station. "Command, this is Hayes." Her voice crackled through the radio at 8:45 p.m. "We've reached the equipment station. Angela's gear is here: helmet, headlamp, water testing kit, but no sign of Angela herself." "Copy that, Hayes. Any indication which direction she went from there?" "Negative. The passage continues deeper into the system, but it's not on any of the research maps. Looks like it drops pretty steeply. We're going to need rope team for further descent." The monitoring station was supposed to be the deepest point of Angela's planned route. According to her research proposal, she was only supposed to check the equipment and return to the surface. There was no reason for her to continue deeper into unmapped sections of the cave. I coordinated with our rope rescue specialists, while Hayes and her team secured the area. Standard procedure: establish safety lines, test air quality, prepare for vertical descent into unmapped cave sections. Everything by the book. I was running through our emergency protocols when something completely unexpected happened. That's when I received the first transmission from Angela. "Command, this is Angela Foster. Over." The voice came through crystal clear on our emergency frequency, using perfect radio protocol. I nearly dropped my headset. Angela was supposed to be missing, potentially injured, somewhere deep underground. But her transmission sounded calm, professional, exactly the way an experienced caver would report in during normal operations. "Angela, this is Bobby at Command. What's your location? Are you injured?" "Command, I'm approximately 1 mile southeast of the monitoring station. Depth unknown. I'm uninjured but unable to return to the surface. Please advise." 1 mile southeast. That would put her far beyond any mapped sections of the wild cave system, deeper than any previous exploration had reached. And if she was that deep, our radio repeaters shouldn't have been able to carry her signal to the surface. I tried to raise Deputy Hayes on the radio, but got only static. Our communication relay system should have carried my transmission throughout the cave, but somehow Hayes wasn't receiving. I could hear Angela clearly, but couldn't reach our search team underground. Angela, stay calm. We have search teams in the cave looking for you. Can you describe your surroundings? Command, I'm in a large chamber with multiple passages. There's an underground stream running east to west. I can hear voices in the distance. Sounds like other cavers. Other cavers. That was impossible. Angela's research team was the only group authorized to be in the wild cave system, and our search team was still at the monitoring station half a mile away. Angela, what other cavers? Can you make contact with them? Static for several seconds, then, command. The other cavers are using our radio frequency. They know our protocols. They're calling for Bobby by name. My blood went cold. I was the only Bobby on our communications team, the only Bobby who'd worked cave rescues in this area for years. How would strangers in an unauthorized cave system know my name and our radio protocols? Angela, do not approach the other cavers. Stay in your current position and maintain radio contact. But the transmission cut to static, and I couldn't raise her again. Over the next hour, I tried repeatedly to contact both Angela and Deputy Hayes. The search team's radios had gone completely silent, as if they'd lost power or been damaged. But Angela's transmissions continued, coming through at irregular intervals with increasing urgency. Command, this is Angela Foster. The other cavers are getting closer. They know things about our operations, names of our team members, details about previous rescues. How do they know about the Carlson case from last year? The Carlson case, a cave rescue from October of 2022, when we'd lost a caver in a flash flood. David Carlson, a geology professor who'd been caught in an underground river when a storm on the surface sent water rushing through the cave system. Only our team knew the specific details Angela was referencing, details that had never been made public, never been discussed outside our debriefing sessions. Command, they're mimicking voices now. I just heard Bobby's voice calling my name, but it wasn't coming from the radio. It was echoing through the cave system. I grabbed the backup radio and tried to reach our surface support team, but discovered something that made my hands shake. According to our communication logs, I had been transmitting throughout the evening. My own voice, using my call sign and radio protocols, coordinating search efforts and giving position updates, but I hadn't made any of those transmissions. Someone or something had been using my voice, my protocols, my authority to coordinate search operations I wasn't running, for teams that didn't exist, in a cave system that was supposedly empty except for our people. The final transmission from Angela came at 11:27 p.m. Command, this is Angela Foster. I've found the source of the other voices. There's equipment down here, radio transmitters, recording devices, databases of our communications going back years. Someone has been monitoring our operations, learning our protocols, collecting our voices. Angela, can you describe the equipment? Can you determine who placed it there? Command, the equipment shows recent activity. Someone was here recently. Maybe still is here. But Bobby, the recordings. They have recordings of cavers who died years ago. People who never made it out. Their voices are still calling for help. Static filled the channel for nearly a minute. Then Angela's voice returned, but different somehow. Flatter, more mechanical. Command, this is Angela Foster. I'm safe and returning to the surface. Please discontinue search operations. But the transmission didn't sound right. The cadence was off, the phrasing too formal. It sounded like Angela's voice, but assembled from recordings, spliced together from previous transmissions. Deputy Hayes and her team emerged from the cave at 12:15 a.m. They'd been searching for hours, they said, but their radios had malfunctioned completely once they descended past the monitoring station. They'd found no sign of Angela, no evidence that she'd been in the deeper sections of the cave. We expanded the search the next day, bringing in specialized cave rescue teams from 3 counties. They mapped and searched every passage in the wild cave system, including previously unexplored sections that dropped more than 200 feet below the main cave level. They found no sign of Angela Foster, no equipment, no recordings, no radio transmitters. But they did find something else. Carved into the limestone wall of the deepest chamber, dozens of names. Some were recent, like Angela's name, freshly scratched into the stone. Others were older, weathered by decades of underground humidity. Every name belonged to someone who had disappeared in the cave systems around Mammoth Cave, some going back 20 years or more. I don't work cave rescues anymore. Transferred to highway patrol, where the worst thing you have to worry about is drunk drivers and weather. But sometimes, late at night when I'm monitoring the radio frequencies, I pick up transmissions on our old emergency channel. Perfect radio protocol. Voices I recognize from past operations. People calling for help from coordinates that lead to solid limestone bedrock. Last week, I heard my own voice coordinating a search for someone named Bobby Hutchins, missing in the wild cave system. I haven't been in a cave in 6 months. Someone was turning the forest into a maze, and we were the rats. I'm Catherine Morrison, everyone calls me Kate, and I've been leading search and rescue operations for Berkshire County for 14 years. Based out of Pittsfield, Massachusetts, I coordinate missing person searches across some of the most challenging terrain in New England. The Berkshire Mountains, dense state forests, and wilderness areas where cell service disappears and GPS signals get lost in the canopy. Mount Washington State Forest is one of our most frequent call zones. 10,000 acres of mixed hardwood and pine forest, with enough unmarked trails and old logging roads to confuse even experienced hikers. David Reeves went missing on October 7, 2023. He was a 34-year-old software engineer from Boston, weekend hiker with decent gear and enough experience to know his limits. His planned route was straightforward: the Alander Mountain Trail, a well-marked 6-mile loop that takes most hikers about 4 hours to complete. Popular trail, well-maintained, the kind of hike families do with young children. David had signed the trail register at 8:15 a.m., planning to complete the loop and be back at his car by 2 p.m. When he didn't show by 6 p.m., his girlfriend called the state police. Standard missing hiker protocol: check the parking area, interview contacts, get search teams mobilized while we still had daylight. I assembled a 6-person team for the initial search. Myself, State Trooper Alan Benedict, and 4 volunteer SAR members who knew the Mount Washington Trail system. We found David's Honda Civic in the trailhead parking area, locked and undisturbed. Everything looked normal: hiking boots, day pack, and water bottles visible in the back seat. According to his girlfriend, David was carrying standard day hiking gear: trail map, compass, first aid kit, emergency whistle. We started up the Alander Mountain Trail at 7 p.m., following David's planned route with headlamps and handheld GPS units. The trail was clearly marked with the familiar white blazes of the Massachusetts trail system, painted rectangles on trees every 100 yards or so, designed to keep hikers on the designated path even in poor visibility. But something was wrong with the blazes from the very beginning. About half a mile up the trail, Trooper Benedict stopped and called me over to examine a tree marked with white paint. "Kate," he said, shining his flashlight on the bark, "look at this blaze." The white rectangle was there, exactly where it should be, but something about it looked off. The paint was too fresh, too bright. And when I looked closer, I could see the outline of an older blaze underneath the original marker that had been painted over with a slightly different shade of white. Someone's been repainting the trail markers, I said. We continued up the trail, checking every blaze we encountered. About half of them showed signs of recent repainting, always with paint that was just slightly different from the original markers. Same size, same placement, but newer. Fresh enough that some still had the faint chemical smell of drying paint. Why would someone repaint perfectly good trail markers? At the 2-mile point, we reached what should have been the junction, where the Alander Mountain Trail connects with the South Taconic Trail. According to our maps and GPS units, this was a major trail intersection with clear signage and multiple blazed paths leading in different directions. But the junction we found didn't match any of our maps. There were 4 trails leading away from the intersection instead of 3. The trail signs were in the right places, but they pointed to destinations that didn't exist on our topographic maps. Bear Den Overlook, 1.2 miles. Hidden Falls Trail, 0.8 miles. Ridge Runner Loop, 2.4 miles. Professional-looking signs, weathered and aged to match the existing trail markers, but directing hikers to places that weren't in any official trail guide. I checked our GPS coordinates. According to the satellites, we were standing exactly where the trail junction should be. But someone had added an extra trail, a well-worn path that led east into dense forest, marked with fresh white blazes, and a sign that read, Summit Vista Trail, 1.5 miles. David could have taken any of these paths, Benedict said. If he was following the blazes, he might not have realized he was leaving the official trail system. We split into 2 teams to check the unauthorized trails. I took volunteers Marcus Chen and Sarah Winters to investigate the Summit Vista Trail, while Benedict and the others checked the Hidden Falls Trail. Standard search protocol: maintain radio contact, document everything, return to the junction in 2 hours, regardless of what we found. The Summit Vista Trail was professionally constructed, cleared of deadfall, graded for drainage, marked with blazes every 100 yards, just like an official trail. But it didn't appear on any map, and according to the State Forest Service, no new trails had been approved or constructed in this area for over a decade. We followed the trail for about a mile before reaching what the sign had promised, a scenic overlook with views across the Berkshire Valley. But the overlook was wrong. According to our GPS coordinates and topographic maps, we should have been looking at Mount Greylock to the northeast and the town of Great Barrington to the south. Instead, we were looking down into a valley that didn't exist on any map, with a small lake that wasn't marked on our charts and what appeared to be buildings or structures scattered through the forest below. I tried to radio Benedict, but got only static. Our GPS units were showing conflicting readings. Some displayed our correct coordinates. Others showed locations that were miles from where we should have been. That's when Sarah spotted the observation platform. Hidden in the tree line about 50 yards from the overlook, camouflaged with natural materials but clearly artificial, was a wooden platform about 8 feet square. Accessed by a ladder attached to a large oak tree, it provided a concealed view of the trail and the overlook where we were standing. Someone had been watching hikers who found this trail. We climbed up to investigate and found evidence of recent use: folding chairs, a small table, and what appeared to be a logbook documenting the activities of people who had visited the overlook. The entries went back 3 months and included detailed descriptions of hikers, their equipment, their behavior, and their reactions to finding the unauthorized trail. One entry made my blood freeze. The 7th of October, male, mid-30s, Boston accent, red day pack, followed blazes perfectly, proceeded to secondary location as planned. David Reeves had been wearing a red day pack. I radioed for the other search teams to return to the junction immediately, but discovered something that made the situation infinitely worse. According to our radio communications, I had been checking in regularly throughout the evening, reporting our progress and positions, but I hadn't made any of those radio calls. Someone else had been using our radio frequency, mimicking my voice and call sign, giving false position reports to the rest of our search teams. When I tried to reach Benedict and the others, I got responses that sounded like their voices, but were somehow wrong. Too formal, too scripted, like someone reading from a prepared text. We hurried back toward the trail junction, but the path had changed. The blazes were leading us in a different direction, toward areas of the forest we'd never seen before. Every time we tried to backtrack, we found new trails marked with fresh white blazes, all leading deeper into the woods. It was Marcus who spotted them first. Figures moving through the forest parallel to our trail, staying just beyond the range of our flashlights. At least 4 people, possibly more, keeping pace with us as we tried to navigate back to familiar territory. "Kate," Sarah whispered, "they're hurting us." She was right. Every time we tried to turn toward what should have been the main trail system, we'd find a fallen tree blocking the path or a new trail marker directing us away from our intended route. The figures in the forest would shift position, always staying just out of sight, but close enough that we could hear them moving through the underbrush. We were being guided somewhere specific, just like David Reeves had been. The trail finally led us to a clearing where we found what we'd been looking for and what we'd been dreading. David's daypack, opened and emptied, with his belongings arranged in a neat display on a fallen log. His trail map, compass, first aid kit, and emergency whistle, all laid out like evidence in a crime scene. But David was nowhere to be found. Standing at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the shadows beyond our flashlight beams, were the figures who had been following us. I counted at least 6 people, all wearing dark clothing and what appeared to be night vision equipment. They didn't move, didn't speak, just watched us from the tree line. I reached for my radio to call for backup, but before I could transmit, one of the figures stepped forward into our light. It was David Reeves. But something was wrong with his movements, wrong with the way he stood. Too still, too rigid, like he was concentrating very hard on how to walk normally. "David," I called out, "are you injured? We're here to help you." He turned toward us, and in the beam of my flashlight, I could see that his eyes were completely unfocused. He opened his mouth to speak, and what came out was my own voice, perfectly reproduced. "Command, this is Morrison. Subject located and secure. Discontinue search operations." That's when I realized David Reeves hadn't been lost at all. He'd been collected. We ran, through unmarked trails and false blazes, past observation platforms hidden in the trees, while voices that sounded like our own called out from the darkness behind us. We didn't stop running until we reached the parking area, where our vehicles were waiting exactly where we'd left them. The official report states that David Reeves was never found, despite extensive searches by multiple agencies. The unauthorized trails and false blazes were removed by state forest personnel, though no one could explain how they'd been constructed without permits or detection. I don't lead searches in Mount Washington State Forest anymore, but sometimes, late at night, I get calls from other SAR coordinators reporting strange trails that appear and disappear, observation platforms that can't be found when investigators return to look for them. They always ask the same question: how do you search for someone when the forest itself is working against you? I don't have an answer for that, but I keep wondering what they're collecting us for. Some places remember every word you've ever spoken, and they're not done talking back. I'm Michael Torres. Everyone calls me Mike, and I've been operating search and rescue boats for Custer County, Idaho for 11 years now. Based out of Stanley, I cover the alpine lakes of the Sawtooth Wilderness, some of the most remote and pristine water in the continental United States. Redfish Lake, Alturas Lake, Pettit Lake, crystal clear mountain water surrounded by granite peaks that rise over 10,000 feet. Beautiful country, but dangerous. The water stays cold even in summer. Hypothermia can set in within minutes, and the nearest hospital is over an hour away on mountain roads. Nicole Brennan went missing on September 15, 2023. She was a 29-year-old software developer from Boise, experienced kayaker who'd been paddling Idaho's mountain lakes for 6 years. Solo trip to Redfish Lake, planning to spend 3 days camping and kayaking in the Sawtooth backcountry. Her itinerary was filed with the Forest Service, her emergency contacts were current, and she was carrying proper safety equipment, including a satellite communicator. When Nicole missed her scheduled check-in on September 17th, her emergency contact, her sister Emily, waited exactly 2 hours before calling search and rescue. Standard missing paddler protocol: verify the planned route, check the vehicle at the trailhead, get boats on the water while we still had daylight. I coordinated the initial water search with Deputy Sheriff Anna Walsh and 2 volunteer SAR members who knew the Redfish Lake area. We found Nicole's Honda Subaru in the boat launch parking area, properly secured with her camping gear still visible in the cargo area. Her kayak was missing from the roof rack, along with her personal flotation device and day paddling equipment. Redfish Lake is about 3 miles long and half a mile wide, surrounded by dense forest and steep mountain slopes. Popular with kayakers and canoeists during the summer, but by mid-September most of the tourist traffic has cleared out. The water temperature in September runs about 55 degrees, cold enough to cause hypothermia in under 30 minutes if someone goes in without proper protection. We launched our search boat at 4 p.m. and began systematic coverage of the lake, starting with the areas Nicole had marked on her planned route. She'd intended to paddle the eastern shoreline on her first day, exploring the smaller coves and inlets where moose and elk come down to drink. The afternoon was clear and calm, perfect search conditions. Visibility across the lake was unlimited, and the water was so still you could see the reflection of every peak in the Sawtooth Range. If Nicole's kayak was floating anywhere on the surface, we'd spot it immediately. But 20 minutes into our search, Deputy Walsh and I heard something that made us cut the engine and drift in silence. A voice calling for help, faint but clear, echoing across the water. "Help! Anyone out there? I'm in the water!" The voice was female, distressed, definitely a call for assistance, but we couldn't pinpoint the direction it was coming from. Sound travels strangely over water, especially in a mountain valley surrounded by granite walls that can reflect and distort audio. The call seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Nicole Brennan," I called back through our boat's megaphone. "If you can hear me, keep calling. We're coming to get you." Silence for about 30 seconds, then, "Help! I lost my kayak! Water's so cold!" This time, the voice seemed to be coming from the north end of the lake, near the inlet where the Salmon River feeds into Redfish Lake. I started the engine, and we headed toward the sound at full throttle, scanning the water for any sign of a person in distress. But when we reached the area where the voice had seemed to originate, there was nothing. No kayak, no person in the water, no disturbance on the surface, just the pristine alpine lake and the reflection of the mountains. "Acoustic tricks," Deputy Walsh said. "Sound bounces weird off these canyon walls. She could be anywhere on the lake." We continued our search pattern, calling out on the megaphone every few minutes and listening for responses. Over the next hour, we heard the same distressed voice 3 more times, always calling for help, always saying she'd lost her kayak and was in the cold water. But each time we reached the area where the sound seemed to be coming from, we found nothing. That's when I noticed something that changed everything about our search. The voice calling for help was using exact phrases, identical wording each time. "Help! Anyone out there? I'm in the water." Followed by, "Help! I lost my kayak. Water's so cold." Always the same words, in the same order, with the same tone and inflection. People in genuine distress don't repeat themselves with that kind of precision. They vary their calls, add details, change their phrasing as panic and exhaustion set in. What we were hearing sounded like a recording being played back. "Walsh," I said, Get on the radio to dispatch. Ask them if we've had any other missing paddler reports on Redfish Lake in the past few years. The response came back 15 minutes later and made my stomach drop. Affirmative, Mike. 3 missing kayakers on Redfish Lake since 2020. Rebecca Martinez, August 2020. David Kim, September 2021. Jennifer Walsh, July 2022. All presumed drowning, bodies never recovered. Jennifer Walsh, the same last name as the deputy sitting beside me in the search boat. Anna, I said carefully. Any relation to Jennifer Walsh from the 2022 case? Deputy Walsh went very still. That was my sister. The voice calling for help across the lake became more frequent as the sun started to set behind the Sawtooth Peaks. Every 10 or 15 minutes, the same desperate calls echoing from different parts of the lake. But now I was listening more carefully, and I started to notice differences in the voices. "Help! Anyone out there? I'm in the water!" That was the voice we'd heard, first young woman, probably Nicole Brennan. "Ayuda! Socorro!" The kayak flipped. Different voice, accented English. Rebecca Martinez from 2020. "Mayday, Mayday! This is David Kim on Redfish Lake. Need immediate assistance." Male voice, very formal, using proper marine distress protocol. David Kim from 2021. And then, just as the last light was fading from the peaks, "Help me. Please, someone help me. I can't feel my hands." A voice that made Deputy Walsh grab my arm hard enough to leave bruises. "That's Jennifer," she whispered. "That's my sister's voice." We were listening to the recorded final moments of every person who had disappeared on Redfish Lake in the past 3 years. Their distress calls, somehow preserved and played back by the lake itself, echoing across the water years after they'd drowned. But the acoustic phenomenon was getting stronger as darkness fell. The voices were becoming more frequent, overlapping each other in a chorus of distress calls from people who were already dead. And underneath it all, the most recent voice, Nicole Brennan, calling for help that would never come. I made the decision to evacuate the lake immediately, but our boat's engine wouldn't start. The motor turned over normally, but wouldn't catch. I checked the fuel, the spark plugs, the electrical connections. Everything was normal, but the engine was completely dead. That's when we heard the new voice. "Search boat on Redfish Lake. This is rescue coordination. We have your position and are en route to assist." It was my own voice, coming across the water with perfect clarity. But I hadn't made any radio transmissions, and our boat's radio wasn't even turned on. "Mike," Deputy Walsh said, and her voice was shaking. "Look at the water." I followed her gaze and saw something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. In the black water around our boat, illuminated by our spotlights, were shapes moving just beneath the surface. Not fish, not debris, but human forms. Arms reaching upward, faces turned toward the surface, mouths open as if still calling for help. The voices across the lake were getting louder, more insistent. Nicole Brennan's voice, Jennifer Walsh's voice, my own voice coordinating rescues that had never happened. And now new voices joining the chorus voices I didn't recognize, speaking words I'd never heard before. Future distress calls, people who hadn't disappeared yet, but would. I pulled out my satellite phone and called for emergency evacuation, but the voice that answered was my own. "Rescue coordination. This is Mike Torres. Search operations on Redfish Lake are proceeding normally. No assistance required." But I hadn't made that call. Dawn was breaking over the Sawtooth Peaks when a Forest Service boat found us drifting in the middle of Redfish Lake. Our engine had started normally, our radio was working fine, and there was no sign of the acoustic anomalies we'd experienced during the night. We never found Nicole Brennan. Her kayak was discovered 3 days later, floating upright and undamaged in a cove on the south shore. No sign of struggle, no indication of how she'd become separated from her boat. The official report lists her as a probable drowning victim, body unrecovered due to the depth and cold temperature of the lake. I don't operate search boats on Redfish Lake anymore. Transferred to land-based SAR operations, where the only voices you hear are from people who are actually alive. But sometimes, on still nights when the wind is right, I can hear the lake calling across the valley. Perfect distress protocol. Voices asking for help that will never come. Last month, I heard my own voice calling from Redfish Lake, reporting that SAR boat operator Michael Torres was missing and presumed drowned. I haven't been near that lake in 8 months. But the lake remembers every word I ever spoke on its waters, and it's not done playing them back.